Hello and welcome to my channel. I'm Tiffany, retired librarian turned homeschool mom. So in this video we're going to tackle another one of Roald Dahl's books because I like torturing myself, and Roald Dahl is a classic, and they keep making movies out of his books and then repeating them. So we're going to look at Matilda. Now, I was first introduced to this story from the Danny DeVito film, so I will cover that. But let's look at the book, which is a bit different and darker. Warning, darker. Comment of Roald Dahl. So this story tells the story of a little girl by the name of Matilda. She's born into a family of, basically her father is a crooked car salesman. Her mother goes to the separate town and plays bingo every day. And she's pretty much left to her own devices. So she learns to take care of herself pretty quickly. And learns to read pretty quickly, and eventually wanders off to the library all before she's 5 and starts reading and everything. And you have the librarian who thinks she's very interesting, and when she's like 4 years old, reads Great Expectations by Charles Dickens. So it's like the librarian's like, she's pretty much reads the entire children's section and then asks the librarian what else she should read. And the librarian's like, okay, you could try this, of all things. And then she just reads a bunch of books. And she's very, very smart. And she finally is sent to school at the age of 5.5. Now, prior to this, she punishes her father because she realizes he's a crooked car salesman, where he's dumping sawdust into cars' oil tanks so they don't sound like they're horrible. He's tricking and doing illegal things like turning back the speedometers so they have less miles on them, and essentially selling crappy cars. So she does a couple of things to him. She glues his hat to his head using super glue. She puts her mother's peroxide into his hair tonic, bleaching his hair. Trying to think what else she does to him. So yes, she glues his hat to his head, and then she turns his head platinum, because normally it's black. What else? She does a couple things to her father to essentially punish him. Only he never knows never realizes it's her. So she starts school about 5.5, and she goes to the local village school, and who's run by a woman by the name of Trunchbull, who is horrible. She's horrible. She terrorizes children. Matilda's teacher is Miss Honey, who is a very sweet one. Her name is Jennifer Honey. You find out her first name later. But once she gets Matilda into her class, she quickly realizes Matilda is really, really smart. And tries to get her moved up to the top of the school, but Trunchbull will have nothing to do with it. So then Miss Honey gets a bunch of textbooks from the older advanced classes and gives them to Matilda so she could learn. Then she tries to talk to Matilda's parents, who think she's crazy because they don't think anything of their daughter, and obviously they're not big on intelligence. Again, Dad's a crooked car salesman. Mom plays bingo all the time. Her brother is very, very stupid and is more interested in paying attention to his father. So then you have Trunchbull. So Trunchbull likes to torture students. You have incidents where she sees a little girl with pigtails and she throws her. Makes a boy eat an entire chocolate cake. Throws a boy out the window. And basically she gets away with it because she goes as Matilda says, she goes all the way. Your parents are never going to believe you if you were told your teacher threw you out the window, or your teacher grabbed your pigtails and threw them. And yes, it said that I think the girl's name is Amanda, it's like she ends up cutting her hair off, because her mother's certainly not going to believe her that the head teacher is how they call it, is torturing children. Then she talks about the Chokey, where we talked to an older girl by the name of Hortensia, who's tormented Trunchbull and got locked in a tiny little room with standing room only, where there's nails on the interior of the door and then cement walls with glass sticking out of them. And she was once made to stand there all day. because she pissed off Trunchbull. And Trunchbull, once a week, teaches one lesson in every single class once a week. So you see her torturing students in Miss Honey's class. Again, I think throwing out the window, pulling a child by their ears, essentially being a horrible human being. Well, one day, Matilda realizes that mentally they had a glass of water. Unfortunately, somehow a newt got in there, and she turns it over and the newt gets on Trunchbull, who completely freaks out because she doesn't like slimy things. So, and Matilda realizes she's done this. And that day she goes home with Miss Honey, who tells her a horrific story about her life. So Miss Honey lives in a tiny little cottage that has no running water. And she tells Matilda the kind of story of her life. She was a little girl when she was 2 years old. Her father was a local doctor. When she was 2 years old, her mother died. And her father brought in her step aunt, I think the mother's stepsister or something. And in front of the father, she's a normal human being. But once Dad's not around, because he was a doctor, he wasn't around often. She essentially tortures little girl, Miss Honey. And then her father, when she's like 5, mysteriously dies, supposedly kills himself, which is more likely that Miss Honey or Trunchbull killed him. Sorry. That's revealed at the end. Trunchbull is in fact Honey's aunt or step aunt. Well, so Trunchbull turns her step niece into her slave. It's implied that she is beaten, and essentially Miss Honey is forced to clean the house, do all the cooking, do all the ironing, basically be a slave to Trunchbull. And she's not a strong person, so she's essentially conditioned to do this. And though she's very, very good in school, she's not allowed to go to the university because Trunchbull won't let her, because she doesn't want to let her slave go. And instead, she's able to drive 40 minutes every day to a teacher's college, and then ends up essentially being forced to work under Trunchbull. And Trunchbull says, because I took care of you all these years, you owe me a ton of money. So with the exception of £1 a week, she convinces the bank and the school to send all of Honey's employment money to Trunchbull. And she has no spine. She's been conditioned. She's enslaved by this woman, and she does it. And then she's sort of living with Trunchbull being her slave. And then eventually she escapes. She's walking one day and she sees an old cottage, and she convinces the farmer to let her have it. He's like, you don't really want this. It has no running water. It's very bare bones. But she says, I'll take it. And so she moves out and is living on £1 a week, including rent and very little. And she's lived that way for about 2 years because Trunchbull is torturing her. So Matilda learns this, and then she gets a couple bits of information. She gets Miss Honey's father's first name. She gets Trunchbull's first name, which is Agatha, and then she gets what they would call Miss Honey, which was Jenny. And the next day, when Trunchbull comes to the school, she takes control of the chalk, and she writes on the board and talks to Trunchbull in the form of Miss Honey's father. And it's like, you killed me. I'm going to haunt you, give my daughter her stuff back, and get out of town. And Trunchbull faints. And eventually they get the doctor. She wakes up and then basically the next day she doesn't come to school. And the second head teacher knocks on the door, nothing. Goes in, and nobody's there, the door's unlocked. All the clothing are gone. All the furniture and everything is still there, but all the clothing, everything is gone. And Trunchbull is gone. And so Trunchbull essentially disappears and is never heard from again. But shortly thereafter, a letter arrives to Miss Honey, gets a call from a solicitor saying, your father's will's been found, the house and everything, and the money, which apparently there is still a sizable chunk of money, because Trunchbull couldn't actually access it, available. So everything belongs to Miss Honey, and she gets her house back, and she gets the money back. So she's able to live comfortably, and she spends time with Matilda almost every day after school. And then one day Matilda goes home and her family's rapidly packing to go to Spain. And she's like, what the heck is going on? It's like, we're going to Spain. We're not going to miss the flight. So she runs back to Miss Honey, tells Miss Honey what's going on. Miss Honey says, that's really not surprising. Most of the village knows that your father's essentially been taking in stolen cars and changing their paint and changing their license plates. And they probably caught up with him. He's probably been sending a bunch of money to Spain all this time in preparation for this happening. She's like, well, I don't want to go to Spain. She's like, you're going to have to. She's like, what if I get them to tell you that I can stay with you? And she's like, okay. She's like, I think I will. So she drags Miss Honey home and essentially says, I want to live with her. I don't want to come with you. And her mother says, well, we might as well just let her go. It's like one less kid to deal with. And that's what happens. And so they flee. Her parents flee with her brother and their stuff, and Matilda stays back and lives with Miss Honey, and that is the end of the story. So it's interesting. Age range of this depends on your children, because again, you have this whole horror story of Miss Honey essentially being tortured by this woman who murders her father and just turns her into her slave for years on end, and convinces schools to send Miss Honey's paycheck to her. And Miss Honey just doesn't. It's like, Matilda's like, that's not right. You shouldn't be able to do that. And she just, I can't stand up for myself, kind of thing. And then with the school, the second person in charge, the male teacher who's very good, takes over. And Matilda is moved up to the top of the class, and she starts being challenged because she's very, very smart, despite being, like 5 or 6 years old. And then one day she also tells Miss Honey that her powers are gone. Because Miss Honey says, well, I'm not surprised that would happen. Your brain was bored. So now it's being challenged, and you're actually having to work rather with kids who are as intelligent as you are and are like 3 times your age. So she's not surprised. So Matilda's powers go away at the end of this story. So, but again, you have Miss Honey being tortured, essentially. You have the torture and abuse of children, and you have crappy parents and abusive parents who are basically fathers in the criminal enterprises. So those are the issues with this book. The torturing of children by people in an authority, particularly in a school situation, is not surprising, considering Roald Dahl's history of basically being tortured and abused in school environments. So, now I do believe this book was actually originally supposed to be darker on Matilda's sense. I'm going to do a quick check here. Let's see. If I can get to Matilda. Yes, this is the book. This came out in, let's see, where on earth? It's giving me dates that are not real. It didn't come out in 2012. No, it was published in 1988. So this is actually one of his later books. This came out near the end of his career, because he died in like 99. So let's see. Apparently, Mr. Wormwood was based off a real character in Roald Dahl's Village, and then the library was based off the library that I think he knew. So there's been a few adaptations. Let's see. He has a few connections to the cookbook, which, yes, I covered back in January. So let's see. Anything else? It's been around for a very long time. But I know that there was, his original draft was much, much darker from what my research has come when it comes to that Matilda was supposed to be some sort of evil thing. But again, he was supposed to be writing children's books, and this was near the end of his career. So he died in like 90 something. So this was published in 1988. This has a film adaptation with Danny DeVito, which is far lighter. And I will cover that, as I mentioned at the beginning of this review. That's how I interact with it. That's far more fun. So, age range. I keep saying this. It's hard with Roald Dahl because his stuff is creepy, and there's abuse in this book. There's a lot of child abuse and implications of a child being tortured and children being locked in a tiny, frightening room. And depending on your children, I would not necessarily read this book aloud. I would say late elementary at the youngest. That's my opinion. Late elementary. No sensitive kids. Do not read this to kids that have really overactive imaginations, like possibly me as a child. This book would have terrified me. If your kids scare easy, do not go anywhere near this book. Or most of Roald Dahl's books, for that matter. If you have sensitive children, Roald Dahl should not be on your list of reading anywhere, as far as I can tell. I read his entire thing, but no. Particularly not this book. Or any ones of that I've recently covered. So, late elementary. And your children cannot be sensitive to be reading this. If you're talking about child abuse, and particularly in school environments, and that is a topic you were covering, this is a good book to tie into that because it talks about that. Matilda makes a point of saying that Trunchbull goes over the top. She does stuff so extreme that children's parents would never believe it. And she terrifies the teachers as well. The teachers as well as the parents. Because she's this huge woman who claims she's never been a child and is just kind of a monster. And there is no more depth to her character. And that's something else you find in Roald Dahl's book. He doesn't do a lot of character development. His evil characters are pretty much straight, flat evil. His good characters are purely good. Period. You barely see much about Matilda's brother at all. He's just kind of there and he's following his father around. So that really is it for this review. It's an interesting book. It's a classic. So that's one of the reasons I've covered it and decided to read it as an adult. But late middle school to non-sensitive children at the youngest when it comes to this. So be sure to check the rest of my reviews. I will cover the film, which is far more family friendly. Cut out a lot of the torture issues. There is the implication that Trunchbull killed the father in the film as well, but you can't really get away with that. And there is still some of the torture for the kids. Not as much, and it's played more for laughs. So, but I will cover that. I have a bunch more book reviews. I've covered some more Roald Dahl. I do an entire introduction to how to deal with Roald Dahl. You can check that out. That's I have a playlist specifically for Roald Dahl. So you can look at the rest of the reviews for that. I have a bunch of other stuff, film reviews, travel stuff, lots and lots of children's book reviews, picture books, chapter books, fantasy stuff, a wide range of stuff. So be sure to like and subscribe. I have a bunch more planned. Thank you.